James catches, puts up a three. Won't go. Rebound Bosh. Back out to Allen. His three-pointer. Bang! Tie game with 5 seconds remaining.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Away Team Podcast. Got another episode coming for you this week. The Philadelphia 76ers and the Indiana Pacers.
But before we get started on that, we are doing a promotion this week. We're going to have a question in the middle of the podcast. And if you answer the question in either an email to awayteampod@gmail.com or a direct message on Twitter with a screenshot of your subscription to the podcast, you'll be entered in for a chance to win a free NBA jersey.
Not Mitchell and Ness or whatever that hand-stitched shit is. Come on.
Yeah, of course. Within reason. And of course, we might have to work out something for shipping internationally outside of Canada or the US. But if we get to 100 subscriptions overall, we're going to do the jersey giveaway. And I think that's all the details for now. Stay tuned on Twitter for more information. Oh, and just one more bit of housekeeping. We are modifying our setup for the pod a little bit. Now that the games are starting in the bubble, we are going to be doing a little bit less preseason and more regular season strategy focused, some bubble takes, that sort of thing.
Basically, the podcast is just going to get a lot better, is what we're saying.
Yeah, we think it's a change for the good.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So, without further ado, the 76ers. I think we can't really talk about the 76ers season without talking about how dramatically their year ended last year when Kawhi Leonard shot the most impossible shot at the end of Game 7 of the conference semifinals and sent them packing. And it basically shaped almost all the moves that they made in the offseason, which were quite a few. So let's get to it, because really what they did was they had a litany of issues, I guess, that they noticed, right? And they could have changed the coach. They could have done some organizational mix-ups. But they decided, no, we're going to renovate the roster. We're going to get rid of some of our most important players and try to bring in other guys that we feel like are better fits.
And just to chime in for a second, it should be noted that after the loss, there were a lot of people saying that they should change the coach.
Some people continue to say that they should change the coach, you know?
Right, which, we might get to later in the episode.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Well, we might. So, in short, the major developments of their last offseason was they signed and traded Jimmy Buttler to the Miami Heat and received Josh Richardson in return. They maxed Ben Simmons on a 5-year, $170 million contract. They signed Al Horford to a $109 million contract, of course declining because this first year that he's in, he's already 34 years old.
Which is a big win, right? Having that contract be a declining contract.
Yeah, no, I mean, the fact they got him to agree with it for that is great. So in addition, they maxed Tobias Harris to, I believe, the same deal as Ben Simmons. And then they signed all these obscure role players, not that important. And then a rookie that a lot of people were excited about, they drafted Matisse Thybulle at number 20, a really wiry but really quick-handed shooting guard who's just a defensive juggernaut, has a lot of open-ended questions on the offensive end. But, he was drafted for his defense, and he was seen as a very good fit for the team and kind of a steal, I think. And then the last big thing, which has only become relevant as of fairly recently, was converting Shake Milton from a two-way G League contract into a full contract. So, after they did all this, what were the expectations?
They were enormous. I think a lot of people were thinking that their new starting five of Embiid, Horford, Harris, Simmons, and Josh Richardson would be so big and rangy that it would just be impossible to score on them, and they would cause so many mismatches on offense that it would be impossible for them not to score. Yeah, so the expectations were super high. I think Zach Lowe had them coming out of the East, and 538 had them going 53-29, which would have been second in the East according to their predictions, right?
A lot of the media basically jumped on this, and I think really what they did was they looked at the Horford pickup and then getting guys like Tobias Harris, who had been with the team for only a few months after last year's trade deadline, kind of more used to the system, getting into the groove. They expect some improvement from Simmons, some improvement from Embiid.
Veteran leadership, too, with Al Horford, I think, was really important.
I think one of the other big things also was that Al Horford was one of the peskiest Embiid defenders in the East. So, if you can't beat him, join him, right? Or if you can't beat him, sign them to your team, basically.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. I remember 2 years ago, he neutralized Embiid, right? And I think, you just look at last season and there was so much turmoil in the locker room that I think the Sixers signed these veterans without prior history of causing locker room turmoil, like a guy like Jimmy Buttler did in Minnesota and Chicago. And you just think, we have a stabilizing force. We've got all these guys signed for multiple years. We're going to be a contender for the next 4 or 5 years.
And I think the overall kind of summary of the last season's roster changes were that bigger equals better. And I'm not just talking about the player sizes, but the contract sizes as well. I mean, maxing a few players like that is not cheap, and they're basically locked into place for a little bit longer with this setup. Bigger equals better, and a lot of people really bought into that belief. So I think it'll be really interesting to go through the season and pick apart what worked, what didn't. What were the real issues that they had this season that made them so disappointing in so many ways, but so intriguing as well?
Right, so let's just jump into the season then. I think we can both agree it was a very odd season.
Very, very odd.
So they were 29-2 at home, which was the best in the league, a full game ahead of the Bucks, and 10-24 away, which is 5 games worse than the Knicks.
Yeah, that's not very good. If I'm not mistaken, they've gotten a couple of wins and losses since then, so I think they might be 11-25. So give them some respect.
Yeah, I remember the first game they lost was technically an away game, right? And it was funny because obviously a home and away don't really mean much in the new NBA bubble. I guess it'll be interesting to see if they do mean anything at all at the end of the season. But it was just funny to see them follow that trend after the first game,
Yeah, let me just give you a list of some of the teams that they lost to on the road. Orlando, twice. The Nets, the Wizards, the Hawks, the Cavaliers, and the Warriors. Notice I did best to worst in a way. All on the road. I don't think they lost to an under 500 team at home. Their home was their fortress, so that makes it even more fascinating what's going to happen in the bubble, because if we can speak to what we're seeing, it does seem like they're still struggling in away games, even though they're playing them on the same fucking court.
Yeah, and if you look at their record against over 500 teams, it's 12-18, and under 500 teams, you're looking at 27-8. Neither of those, I think, is very jarring. You'd expect them to win a few more games against over 500 teams, but that's on pace with a 6th seed in the East, I think.
Right. It only really clashes if you have this, I guess, media-fed narrative that this is a true contending team that some outlets still continue to push.
In terms of that narrative, it's very important because contending teams tend to beat other contending teams.
Right, exactly. Yeah, so I mean, not surprisingly, they had a more defense-focused kind of game. So their offensive rating was about 111. It was 15th in the league. Their defensive rating was a good bit higher than that. It was 108.7, which I guess in 2020 is good for 7th best in the league. And I think a lot of this comes down to these concerns that some people voiced before the season started about the lack of shooters, right? It's like, we're going big, and you have some guys, like Al Horford can hit a good mid-range shot. He's a decent shooter from 3. You have Josh Richardson, whatever, he's fine. But there aren't really any guys that can just either create a shot from the outside. That's definitely not happening. But even guys that can really spot up consistently, like you have a few role players, but they don't have a guy that can just run off a screen and get them a bucket really fast, It's a legitimate struggle. They were 22nd in the league in 3-point attempts, and they were 14th in 3-point percentage, so, more or less average. And they're actually taking more 3-point attempts than last year and making them at the same rate, but it just isn't enough. What I thought was interesting was that they're the first in the league in opponent 3-point attempts per game, which means that they're the best at preventing 3-point attempts from happening.
The lack of 3-point attempts on offense, I think, is jarring, just in that back when Sam Hinkie was constructing this team, he put a emphasis on the Houstonian philosophy of no mid-range jump shots, replace those with shots at the rim and 3-pointers. it's just odd to see them having gone so far away from that philosophy, 4 years later?
Yeah, I mean, it's like you do have a bunch of guys on your team that basically exist in the mid-range now, which is very strange for 2020 and can be weird to watch because a lot of these shots, they just look like bad shots. I mean, for some of the Sixers players, they are, I guess, decent shots. I think Hinkie did have the right idea. I do think that you can go to too much of an extreme with the three-point shot because there is so much variance in it, whether or not you're having a good night, bad night. But I think that eschewing it entirely can be a bit detrimental. I think the issue for the Sixers isn't that they're not shooting threes because they're choosing to. I just don't think they have the personnel to be a volume three-point shooting team.
And I think this segues into our first topic for the team, which is, what are they going to do about their wings? Last season, pretty much all of their two-guard minutes were taken up by J.J. Reddick and Jimmy Buttler. J.J. Reddick's one of the most prolific three-point shooters of all time. And while Buttler is hit or miss from three, you would argue that he can still get a reliable three-point shot off, especially off the dribble. So These players are gone. How did they replace them? That's the question, right?
Yeah. For Jimmy Buttler, right, even though he's not necessarily the best three-point shooter, he has a lot of utility in a lot of other ways. Mm-hmm. Because in 18-19, I mean, he was the chief secondary player in so many ways. He was second in points per game, tied with Tobias Harris, second in assists per game, second in free throw attempts per game, second in win shares per 48, and a lot of the time he was the one who kind of lifted up the bench unit when some of the starters rested, playing staggered and playmaking and leading them. I like to call him the super glue guy.
Yeah.
Because he does everything, and he plays defense really well as well. So Buttler plus JJ Redick, I mean, that's 36 points that they contributed to the team, not to mention everything else that they provide in terms of spacing, defense, and playmaking. So what was the replacement for Jimmy Buttler in particular? The sign and trade, Josh Richardson, who is, I guess, like a budget Buttler, makes $10 million a year, so you don't have to pay him a max. But he does some of the same things. He can play make a little bit, he can make his own shot sometimes. He can...
Good defender, especially in Miami. There were years that he was arguably an all-defensive candidate.
Yeah, the problem is he just hasn't played that well this year. He's had a bad year, a huge downgrade from Jimmy Buttler. So Jimmy Buttler was second in all those different stats. Josh Richardson isn't first or second in any stat. He's fourth in the game in terms of points scored, fifth in assists. This is what really bothered me, though. He's dead last in win shares per 48. There's a lot of chaff that you have to sort through before you get to Josh Richardson.
It's funny, I think going into free agency, Philly was set on signing Horford and Harris to maxes, or near maxes in the case of Horford, and replacing the minutes for Buttler at the two-guard position and J.J. Redick was going to be seen as a Moneyball approach of, we're going to cobble together minutes and replicate the overall value of these two very good players that we lost by increasing the value at other positions, right? Power forward and small forward, and with depth at the two guard, right?
I mean, I think the issue with that strategy is that you have one guy who's proven, who's doing all these things, and then you replace him with a bunch of guys. Like, don't get me wrong, Josh Richardson, Tobias Harris, these guys are perfectly fine players. But they're not all-stars, and they probably won't ever be all-stars. They're definitely not going to get all NBA honors unless Tobias Harris goes crazy. And they just have some inconsistency, I guess. If you look at Tobias Harris, who we'll talk more about later, but it's like, one of my questions coming into the season was, is he going to shoot 40% like he did some years, or is he going to shoot 32% like he did some years? Josh Richardson is kind of the same way. Last year, he shot 36%. Before that, he shot 38%. Really good. This year, he's shooting 33% from three.
Yeah, I would say, though, that with Josh Richardson, you were looking at last season, which in a lot of ways was his breakout year, as an indication of his value going forward. And if you were Elton Brand, then you're probably thinking that that player is a really strong number 5 starter on your team. As a fifth offensive weapon, someone who can ball handle a little, get you a bucket.
Also, what's interesting about him, and this ties into our talk about the Sixers as this mid-range team, is that when he was in Miami, he was actually taking 45% of his attempts from three. And now that's dropped a good bit to 38%. The Problem is, he's not taking those 7% of shots at the rim. He's taking them from mid-range. And what's crazy is he shoots 57% from long twos, from 16 feet to the three-point line, but he shoots in the mid-30s from 3 feet to 16 feet, which is really counterintuitive.
Just the worst floater ever.
Yeah, but it actually means that his long twos are more valuable on average than his threes.
Yeah, if that's a 57% shot, then you would encourage him to take it. It's funny, I was looking into these stats because I think the counting stats are pretty jarring for Josh Richardson. But then you look at his advanced stats and it's like, okay, he's still plus 2.7 points per 100 possessions for the year, which is solid. And then you saw he's plus 7.1 points per 100 possessions next to Embiid, which is really important because he's supposed to be a complementary player.
I mean, it might save his ass. Because if you look at his individual advanced stats, they're not so good. I mean, BPM, he's basically -2, which is, replacement level stats. His win shares, as I said earlier, are the lowest on the team. It's interesting how you look at these different advanced stats and they give you different stories. I do wonder how much of Josh Richardson's good on-off and plus-minus numbers are a result of playing next to these guys, but I think the fact that he does play very well next to Embiid does indicate that they work together. It's not something you can say about Embiid and everybody else.
Yeah.
So let's move on to some of the other guys that are supposed to moneyball the Buttler Reddick minutes.
We'll call him the committee.
The committee. So we got Furkan Korkmaz, who is one of the few good three-point shooters on the team. He takes 5 a game and makes 39% of them. Really their only volume shooter. He's not a JJ Reddick by any means, but it's good enough, I guess.
He's a knockdown shooter, though, and when you have such a dearth of three-point shooting on the team, his role becomes really important. Little side note, bet on himself this year, or rather, the Sixers made off with quite a good contract on him. The Sixers declined his team option and then signed him to a 2-year minimum, so they basically got 2 extra years of Furkan Korkmaz at even less money. And then he had his breakout year.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, early in the season, there was a really intense game between Portland and Philly where Anthony Simons hit a last-second 3, and everyone thought it was over. Then Furkan Korkmaz hit an even more last-second 3, and it won them the game. So I think that increases your confidence, and it increases how many minutes you play. And he was needed to slot into the starter role at certain points. So I think he's still growing. We'll see if the Sixers environment is conducive to growth, but it's a good start. Another guy that really broke out this year was Shake Milton, who was a G Leaguer last year and signed onto a real NBA contract last summer. And he was not really making much noise until Ben Simmons got injured and he started playing starting point guard minutes. During this time, he made 16 three-pointers in a row. And even when he's not doing crazy record-breaking things like that, he's still shooting threes at 45%. Very good. So this is what's interesting to me. When he was playing off the bench, he's scoring 5 points a game on 54% true shooting. Not exciting at all. As a starter, he started scoring 13 points per game on 67% true shooting, shooting 49% from 3. Now I got your ear. In the 4 games that he played over 30 minutes, he scored 26 points per game on 87% true shooting, 72% from the three-point line. It's a small sample size, but it's a very impressive showing, especially when you're a guy who hasn't been tested at all and you're asked to slot into this role. I think since then, obviously, he's regressed a bit, but it was a very exciting time, and some would even say, Milt sanity.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of the reason that he is slotted into the starting lineup now in the bubble is some residual effects of that crazy run, because he gets injured immediately after that run, right? And we didn't really get to see him simmer down. But, right, he's part of the committee with Korkmaz and Richardson. And then just to round out the committee, we've got Matisse Thybulle, who's just one of the most insane perimeter defenders, maybe the best perimeter defender rookie I've ever seen.
It's insane.
The guy's averaging 3.5 steal percent and 2.6 steals per 36 minutes, which are both absolutely mental. And he's been hit or miss from 3. He had a hot 3-point shooting stretch, but that dropped down to 35.7%. I think that's one of the issues with him and why his minutes have fluctuated so much this season is you know what you're getting on the defensive end, but on the offensive end, it's just been kind of night to night with him.
Yeah, and I mean, if you look at the stats over the course of the season, he's accumulated 0.2 offensive win shares, which is very, very bad, I think, to put it nicely.
Like, you're usually racking up your win shares on offense.
Yeah. And in the times where he started in place of Josh Richardson, I think earlier in the season when Richardson got injured or something, the lineup had a shocking minus 25 net rating. And I think it taught Brett Brown to never do that again.
Yeah.
And then just to quickly talk about Alec Burks and Glenn Robinson, because they're on the team.
Very quickly. They deserve maybe 2 words. Those guys have been terrible.
Not good.
2 words.
Burks is bad. Still shooting decently from 3, but Robinson, I mean, he forgot how to shoot again. I mean, this has happened to him before, so I don't know what his deal is, but let's talk about someone a bit more interesting.
Yeah.
Al Horford. Just the most exciting roster addition for them because he had a great season with Boston last year, and, you know, you take him and you add him to this core that's already built for a deep playoff run, and you think, well, this is going to be great. He's very savvy. He's been to the All-Star game 5 times. He's made an all-defensive team. Can shoot the 3 okay. He shoots 73% at the rim, which is amazing.
Right.
And he's even 45% on long twos, like really, really efficient big man. And also, he averaged 4.6 assists per game in his time with Boston. So not only was he good scoring, but he could facilitate the offense when you need him to as well, which is a great asset to have in a big man.
The perception of Al Horford going into the signing was he's going to make any team better because he can just do so many different things. Mm-hmm. He can pass, he can shoot, he can play defense. He can do whatever you want. He can space the floor as a 4, theoretically. You know, we hadn't really seen him play much 4 for his whole career going into this season. And the idea was maybe he can be that floor spacer. It's funny because his 3-point shooting this year was okay, a little bit lower than previous years. What cratered is his long 2 percentage. These shots used to be his bread and butter. Before he started taking threes, he was known to be a pick and pop long 2 shooter. And he was known to be one of the best in the league, on pace with people like Chris Paul and Chris Bosh. But that's just kind of collapsed for him this year. What do you think the reason for that is?
I mean, there's a few reasons for it. Just to underscore what you just said, this is his career worst true shooting year, and it's his first ever season where he's been below league average on effective field goal percentage.
Yeah.
Just not efficient at all. He's losing the team points when he's shooting the ball, basically. I think part of the issue is when you slot him into the 4 and play him next to Embiid, you're taking away an entire part of the floor that he's used to playing out of. He's basically pushed into these situations that I don't think he's as used to. When he was always a center, you always leave the post open for him. He can do whatever he wants in there. When you have Embiid there, you're crowding it up, and I think expecting him to be a floor spacer from 3 as a primary part of his role, because he's taking 40% of his shots from 3 now, I think that was a bit of an ask for them.
He's got the 3-point stroke for somebody who is a center, right? And on a pick and pop, he's going to have a lot of time to shoot. He doesn't really have a great 3-point stroke for a kick-out pass, right? Mm-hmm. Where his defender's going to be closer.
I think the other issue is defensive, right?
Yeah.
I think people have said, he's lost a step. I think playing the 4 is only going to accentuate those issues because you got a guy who's aging, who's a big, and then you have to play him against nimbler guys. They might switch someone onto him that's even smaller, and now he just looks terrible.
It's funny, we talk about this as if he has been so bad in that original starting lineup, and that lineup's still plus 8.6 in 244 minutes. It's still a really solid team, mostly because they're so big, It's tough to score on them.
It is weird that they so desperately wanted to move him to the bench. I think the issue, right, is that when you break down that lineup, he's good with Simmons, he's good with Tobias Harris, he's +3 with Simmons, +4 with Tobias Harris. He's played almost 1,600 minutes with Tobias Harris. It's insane. But with Embiid, he's only played 500-something minutes, and he's a -1. Not terrible. But if you're Philly, you look at that and you're like, okay, we need to make a change because Embiid is the core of our team. So every move that we make is about making him better because when he plays better, we win. Al Horford playing better, that's great. But if we can find a better place for him that's not going to affect Embiid's efficiency or performance whatsoever, then that's going to be better for us in the long run.
Right, and let's just use this as a segue into Tobias Harris, their other big free agent signing. switching Tobias to the 4, which he essentially plays. Like, there's some speculation about Ben Simmons playing the 4, but on offense, when Ben Simmons has the ball, Tobias is going to be playing whatever the 4 position is, you know? Tobias is big enough to play the 4, and he's quick enough, I think, to be a more modern version of the 4.
Mm-hmm.
His season this year was pretty good. Solid percentages, 19 points per game, 7 rebounds. But the issue here is he's average in the advanced stats. 0.12 win shares per 48, which is just kind of middling. 0.6 BPM, which is a good starter. You don't really have an all-star case with a number like that.
No, not even close. And his defensive box plus minus is a clear negative, minus 0.4, right? It's very concerning when your team identity is built around how good your defense is.
Yeah, maybe he's a little bit overpaid, right? To have stats that are indicative of a 3rd or 4th option. But I'd say he had a pretty good year overall.
Yeah, I mean, he's one of their major offensive options. He can shoot from all over the floor. I'd argue he shoots way too many long twos. He's in the 85th percentile for long
He likes
mid-rangers.
those.
He likes those. He's always been doing it, but it's gotten worse in Philly. Maybe they've enabled him. I don't know. I mean, he's basically good at almost every play, not great. The one issue, I think, because he's also in this conversation about how do we replace Jimmy Butler's productivity, right? Tobias Harris takes up some of the scoring of that. He's only in the 48th percentile on ISO plays and only scores 0.85 points per possession. In comparison, last year, Jimmy Butler scored about a point per possession and was in the 76th percentile, which meant that when the going got tough, he could get you a bucket relatively consistently, whereas Tobias Harris just really can't do that, and they haven't really replaced him with anyone who can. But actually, what I thought was interesting was he's a better spot-up shooter than last year's JJ Reddick, which is not something you'd expect.
It's funny, in replacing Jimmy Butler, they thought that some of the late-game ball handling, getting a bucket down the stretch, could be siphoned off to Tobias Harris, and the advanced stats show that he's actually better in the complementary role than the lead ball handling role.
And when we talk about Tobias Harris, we also, because you were talking about his contract, he's going to be making $41 million by the end of it. And he's going to be 31 years old. And I just don't see his productivity increasing enough.
Dude, he's going to be MJ when he's making that 41K, though.
I feel like he's going to be
41
sleeping. I feel like he's going to be sleeping off hangovers every day. I don't know about MJ, but I guess let's move on to Ben Simmons. Because I think him and Embiid are the core of this team, right? They're the 2 big gets from a draft that have come in and become 2 of the best players in the league. The question is, how do they work together? So let's talk about Ben Simmons. Once you've said one thing about Ben Simmons, you've basically said it all because he's just been the same player since he's entered the league. He doesn't shoot threes. He's a solid all-star. He basically does the same thing. He's their playmaker, but he can also drive to the rim, no problem. He's got a great touch around the rim. The only big change is this year that he's gotten a bunch more steals. Like his steal percentage is almost 3%, which is great. And his blocks have gone down a bit. So, I don't know, maybe he's playing with a bit more poise. Do you have anything to add?
I just love Simmons. I think he's an amazing defender. Not just in terms of on-ball defense, which is really important for him, right? Because he can guard 1 through 4 and even some 5s. But also off-ball. I mean, he sees passing lanes really well, right? He's always had a really high steal percentage.
He's also very unselfish, and you just look at his points per game to see that. He's not always trying to get himself the bucket. He's always looking for the best way to score.
Yeah. My favorite thing about him, though, is just how freaking creative he is. Mm-hmm. You just love watching players that do something you've never seen before. That free throw putback against Miami earlier in the season. When the hell have you seen that? 1 second left, he's on the perimeter, and he runs down into the paint and grabs the free throw to put it in.
Clearly, he'd have never seen it.
I've never seen it. It was wild, you know? I'm very high on players that have the basketball IQ to be creative in the moment. Because that's just very difficult when you are running 1,000,000 miles an hour and it's difficult to think.
He clearly understands the game very, very well. I would say it's really just mainly mechanical things that he needs to improve upon. I mean, he needs to shoot threes at the end of the day. Like, can't just not ever shoot them. I do think there is an interesting question right now, right? Because they decided, okay, Simmons at point guard, not working. Let's slot him to the 4. But really, what is the difference there? Is it just putting lipstick on a pig? You're basically giving the ball to him to handle in every play anyways. So what's the difference between him playing the 4 and being the primary ball handler and him playing point guard?
I'm with you. I just don't think it's going to be that different than him being a point guard. I don't think that Shake Milton is going to be initiating the offense. That's for damn sure. In fact, I'd probably say Tobias Harris or Josh Richardson are going to spend more time initiating the offense than Shake Milton. He's out there because theoretically he's a knockdown shooter.
Yeah.
Right? And, you can't talk about Simmons without talking about Embiid, right? The guy was still a monster this year, but I think his stats dipped a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, they dipped in terms of volume, right? He played some fewer minutes, he scored fewer points, but he still did them in a very Embiid-y way. He was still just destroying people on the interior, drawing a ton of fouls. I mean, one of the most prolific foul drawers in the league. And he's also really good at avoiding fouls on the defensive end, just because, he has so much size, he doesn't need to foul you to stop you from getting the ball in the hoop.
It is important to say, though, that it's the most difficult to avoid fouls when you are as big as him. Like, if you look at foul rates, it's always guys like Hassan Whiteside, Dwight Howard, that are enormous and bulky, that lead the league in fouls.
Well, it's because they got to defend guys like Embiid, right?
Partially, but it's also because I think there's just a finesse lacking in players like that.
Yeah, I mean, he has a ton of finesse. And I think what's very unique for this team in 2020 is that a huge part of their play calls are just passing the ball to Embiid in the post, catching a double team or even triple team sometimes. And then he can either get around the double team with his athleticism, he can pull up and shoot a mid-range jumper, or he can pass out to one of the shooters around the arc, or upcutting Ben Simmons, or cutting Tobias Harris. Like, he has all these options of what he can do in that position, and it actually makes the post-up a very good play for him because he is such a threat from inside.
I mean, the issue with his passing is, if you watch the game footage, sometimes he looks like one of the best passing big men in the league, but if you look at the numbers, and if you watch the right games, he turns the ball over a lot. I think for him, there is an inconsistency in the way he passes. His assist to turnover ratio is essentially 1-to-1, which is not great. Even for a center, that's really bad. I think the biggest thing for Embiid this year was the change in his shot selection. So his true shooting stayed the same, but his field goal percentage dropped slightly. And I think part of that is he shot 9% less shots at the rim and 10% more shots that were long twos, which isn't great,
I mean, it's like you really ideally want him getting to the rim.
Yeah, what's the use in being huge and having amazing post moves if you're not going to use them?
No, I mean, it's true. It's true. I mean, it is...
I feel like an old man harping on it, but...
I mean, it's weird to see it in this day and age, to see a guy who's taking these long twos out of a post play, like, it just doesn't sound right. I do think that it works surprisingly well for him. I don't know if any other player in the league could really do what he does. I mean, he's still fairly efficient on those long twos, but you never know when he's going to go cold. Because that's really the biggest issue when you're shooting those long twos. When they're going in, they look great. But when you start shooting 30-something% on them for a game, 2 games, 3 games, you're going to lose those games if you take enough of those.
It makes me think of the game they played in the bubble against Indiana. When Indiana was guarding him with Jakar Sampson the entire game, who's essentially half his size, he might actually be half his size, and Joel Embiid was resigned to shoot jump shots over Jakar Sampson all game instead of taking him down into the post.
It made Jakar Sampson look a lot better than he actually was. Because, I think Jakar Sampson had like a team high +20 ± when he was guarding Embiid the entire game. I think Embiid was overestimating him or something. I mean, he could easily get to the rim.
Maybe he looked on Basketball Reference before the game and saw his nickname, Jakar SpongeBob Sampson. It's like, damn, this guy really does look like SpongeBob. It freaks me out.
Embiid, there's nothing to be afraid of. You'll be all right. And then just on the topic of his presence being so vital for the Sixers, he played 50 fewer minutes than Furkan Korkmaz this year and 500 fewer than Horford. So, I mean, part of the issue is the team has had to learn And they've had years of this, right? They already are kind of used to it. They have to learn and always make adjustments around playing without Embiid. You know, it's like, okay, rest up for the playoffs, sure. What if you don't get to the second round because you lost to a bunch of teams on the road and you make it to the 6th seed and you get knocked out by a better team, to be quite frank?
Yeah. I mean, it's funny how this season seeding isn't going to matter as much, right? Because there isn't going to be as strong of a home court advantage. So maybe they chose the exact right season, and maybe they knew about COVID back in November, right?
Should we investigate Brett Brown's emails? And then one last thing that we should talk about, just Simmons and Embiid together, right?
Yeah, for sure.
I think you pulled some interesting stats on that.
You know, you can't talk about Simmons and Embiid without wondering whether or not they work together. And I just found some lineup data from Cleaning the Glass on them. So Simmons and Embiid together is +3 point differential. And they have struggles on offense, right? 27th percentile. But they're in the 92nd percentile on defense, which is also, interestingly enough, really similar in terms of percentiles with Simmons and Horford. Makes sense, you know, because they're similar lineups, right? Simmons and no Embiid is +1.6 point differential, and Embiid without Simmons is +11.3.
Jesus.
So any of those people, I'm not going to say names, but I have heard people say they should trade Embiid. They should take a look at this stat first.
Yeah, I would rather have the guy that's getting +11. And it does make sense because Embiid is a more versatile player. Like, Simmons is amazing, don't get me wrong. He adds so much to that team, but the lack of a ranged game and the lack of the development that you'd expect from a young player over these few years, you basically have your fucking scouting report from his rookie year. You can just use that. Whereas Embiid, I mean, he's adding these mid-range jump shots that don't make any sense, but they're going in and, like, he's adding new things to his game. He's getting better at shooting threes. He's shooting 34% now, which for Al Horford's a bad season. For Embiid, that's a great season.
Yeah.
He's developing more and more, and he's clearly the heart and soul of this team. Simmons is good, but I think the numbers really do speak for themselves, and I think that the Sixers would do well trading Simmons for a point guard that can shoot.
Yeah. Even the issues we were talking about earlier with passing out of double teams, that becomes a lot easier when you have 4 shooters around him.
Absolutely. So with all these big questions, got to talk about Brett Brown just for a second. Is he the right guy to steady the ship? I personally don't think so. I mean, clearly with all these road losses, they had a lot of issues with motivation and focus. I don't know why they were so good at home, but Brett Brown, you just see him and what does he do? What does he add to the team? He's clearly not coming up with insane X's and O's to discombobulate the opponent's offense and defense. So why does he still have a job?
Yeah, it's funny. He's known as a player coach, a coach that's good at reaching out to players and connecting with them. But his situation with convincing Ben Simmons to shoot threes got so bad that he had to implore the media to talk to him.
Yeah.
What on earth was that, you know?
It's insane. It's insane.
That just shows to me a guy who doesn't have control over the locker room. I thought he deserved another chance after last year, but I was still maybe 60-40 on that decision. And now I'm thinking maybe I was wrong.
Yeah. I think it's time to end the process. He was really one of the last real holdovers from that era. I mean, of course, you acquired some really nice guys, but they flourished after the process ended. He was in the thick of it. I think the stat is like, if he won every single game for the next 2 years straight, he'd still have a negative win percentage or whatever.
Yeah, I remember for a while, if you sorted Basketball Reference by worst losing percentage for coaches, it was like a bunch of guys who got fired within 20 games and Brett Brown.
That's insane. I mean, it's not his fault, but it's insane.
You know, they're still a legitimate contender, according to 538, right? Mm-hmm. And their new lineup looks terrible, or at least it did in the first game. The next 2 games,
I mean, they're winning, but they're not winning with authority. You know what I mean?
Milton looked better in the second game.
He hit the game winner, so that's pretty huge. But
the first game was rough.
I mean,
0 points, 3 assists, 3 turnovers, 5 fouls, 19 minutes.
Not great. Yeah, he kept getting put in and then taken out 2 seconds later when he had a turnover. I mean, that's going to fuck with you no matter who you are. So credit to him for overcoming that. That being said, the Sixers should not be struggling the way they have against a team like the Spurs. I mean, of course, it's not fair to base it on one game, but it is kind of a series of games that they have played now, and they haven't looked particularly great in any of them. I think the idea that they are a legitimate contender is falling apart, especially when you consider the road that they're going to have to take. They're facing up against Boston or Miami in the first round, probably. Then they're facing up against Toronto or Milwaukee, possibly. And then they have to fight Toronto or Milwaukee in the next round, or Boston. I just don't see it.
Yeah.
I don't see it.
Yeah, I mean, just to end the Sixers, though, I think it's a testament to their oddness that I could actually see this team figuring it out in 4 games and winning it all.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's how freaking talented they are.
Yeah, the talent is astounding. The roster construction, I think, a bit short-sighted, considering that they made it huge, and it's like, okay, we're going to neutralize Giannis when we run into him in the finals.
Yeah.
The conference finals. You're not going to run into Giannis, guys. You snoozed through the season, and you ended up in the 6th seed, and you're going to get knocked out by Boston, probably.
Yeah.
I'm just speechless, you know? It's sad because these guys are so talented, but they're not pieces that fit well together.
Yeah.
And we've learned that through experimentation this year. It's a good experiment, guys, but pack it up. It's time to go home.
Maybe we should ditch the 2 towers offense idea, because it's like never worked other than Tim Duncan and David Robinson. All right, break time?
Break time. And we're back with the Indiana Pacers. But before that, what you've all been waiting for, the trivia question. Which NBA player once dressed up as Darth Vader for a dunk contest, and upon completing his dunk, went and killed another NBA player with a lightsaber? So, you need to name both players. With those answers, just email us or DM us on Twitter, awayteampod@gmail.com, or @awayteampod on Twitter, and you'll be entered for a chance to win a jersey of your choice from Nike, not from Mitchell & Ness. And we'll be announcing the winners probably this weekend on Twitter.
And like we said at the beginning of the podcast, we're only doing the giveaway if we can get to 100 subscriptions to the podcast. So send the screenshot of your subscription over, and please tell all of your friends so we can hit that mark.
That's right, because if you don't do that, ain't no one getting that jersey.
Yeah, everyone loses.
Yeah, us too. So we're not happy about it. Well, anyways,
yeah,
let's talk about the Pacers. Actually, interestingly enough, very similar in some ways to the Sixers, but I think where the Sixers started off with very high expectations and underwhelmed, the Pacers started with, let's say, above average expectations. People expected them to be kind of a lower East seed, but still in the playoffs, obviously. And they basically met or slightly exceeded them. So it's just an interesting tale of 2 teams. I don't think anyone expected the Pacers to be ahead of the Sixers, but such is life.
Yeah, I mean, let's just get into their offseason really fast.
Yeah.
They did the sign and trade for Malcolm Brogdon, who was signed to a 4-year, $85 million deal, and they had to give up a first-round pick and 2 second-round picks for him, which I think was a huge win for them. Brogdon had just come off of a 50-40-90 season and had played really well in the playoffs for the Bucks.
Especially when you consider they lost Darren Collison, who was a very good point guard for them.
Lost him to religion.
Lost Collison to religion, yeah.
What is he again? He's a Quaker or something?
Jehovah's Witness.
Jehovah's Witness,
yeah.
Right.
And then, Oladipo got injured last year, so they needed someone to fill the gap. And I mean, Brogdon more than fills the gap. The other issue is they lost Bojan Bogdanovic to Utah. That's probably was their biggest issue over the offseason. He was their best shooter. He was their top scorer by over 400 points over the season. But they picked up a few wings. They got Jeremy Lamb for 3 years, $31.5 million. We won't talk about him again. He suffered an ACL tear in the middle of the season. Rest in peace.
Yeah. I love that he came to the bubble, though. It's so funny. They asked him why he came to the bubble, and he was like, it's better than being in Indiana alone.
Honestly, I respect that. And that's good. That's good for team morale, too. You know, you like seeing a familiar face. They got
So
TJ
good.
Warren in a very weird trade where Phoenix offered them cash and then said something about a second-round pick, and Indiana was like, oh, do they want a second-round pick? That's fine. Felix was like, no, we're giving you a second-round pick and TJ Warren and cash. And they were like, okay. So they got TJ Warren, and they turned that second-round pick into more second-round picks, which they used to get Malcolm Brogdon. So Good moves, Phoenix.
How many times have we mentioned the TJ Warren Phoenix trade on this podcast?
Not enough. Not enough, dude. That is always going to be just the most ridiculous trade I've ever seen.
I feel like it's come up like 3 times.
Hey, I mean, TJ Warren's in the news these days, so it's still relevant, you know?
Yeah. So then they signed Justin Holiday, who was a really good bargain pickup at $4.7 million. And they just finished off the offseason extending Domantas Sabonis 4 years, $77 million, drafting Goga Piazza at number 18, which was kind of strange because he's a big and they've got Turner and Sabonis. And then signing TJ McConnell to a 2-year, $7 million deal. Just a bunch of wins, I think, in terms of free agency signings.
Yeah, no real bad moves whatsoever. All those players are really complementary to the system, except for Goga Bitadze, I guess. But, like, it's an 18th pick. You pick a guy that you think is the best guy available and see what happens. Maybe they saw that photo of his, meet and greet table next to Zion's and saw all the journalists at Zion's and no one talking to Goga. And they're like, let's throw this guy a bone. We'll sign him to a rookie contract and see what happens.
Yeah.
But going into the season, the general idea, based on 538 SB Nation and the Vegas over-under, was about like a 43 to 47 win season. And based on how optimistic the publication was about the rest of the East, from 4th to 8th seed. Whoever put 8th seed. I'm not going to say who because that would be embarrassing to them, but they were very wrong. And I think Zach Lowe predicted they'd miss the playoffs, so sorry, Zach Lowe, to put you on blast, but
yeah,
come on, man.
A bad podcast for Zach Lowe.
Not great. I mean, who did he put ahead? Like the Pistons or something?
Fuck, who was it?
The Hawks?
No.
Let's just pretend it was the Hawks.
I think he liked Chicago.
Yeah. Classic trap.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest question going into the season, right? Last year, they started off 32-15, which is a 56-win pace, but Oladipo's injury happened, and then after that, they kind of sputtered along to the end, went 16-19. So without him and Bogdanovich, what's the offensive identity of this team? And what are Sabonis and Brogdon going to do? I mean, they'll make the playoffs because they're both very talented in the East, not very strong. But, like, would they be a factor in the playoffs? Would any team actually be intimidated going up against them? You know, Oladipo is their main guy. So without him in the picture, a lot of teams are going to be asking those questions.
Yeah, and I think to sort of piggyback on that question, the big question with Brogdon, too, was, okay, we've seen him thrive as a secondary ball handler on the Bucks, right? It's easy to make 50% of your field goals and 40% of your three-pointers when Giannis is passing to you and giving you amazing looks. What's he going to look like as the primary ball handler for Indiana without Oladipo?
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge test for him, and I think a big bet, one that paid off, of course, because Brogdon had a pretty good season, as we'll get to. But yeah, I mean, it's a huge question, right? You take a role player, basically, and you convert him into one of the central pieces of your system.
Right.
So let's just talk about their overall season really fast. Their offensive rating was 17th in the league, and their defensive rating was 6th. And if you have good memory, that's basically identical to Philadelphia. Like, they're within 2 spots of each other, maybe even 1 spot of each other. Another kind of similarity they have with the Sixers, but even more to an extreme, they're the least 3-point reliant team in the league. So they take the fewest 3-point attempts. They're also the least free throw reliant because they have the least free throw attempts and fouls drawn in the league. What this means is that they have the second best field goal percentage in the entire league, which sounds great. That turns into the 10th best effective field goal percentage when you start counting up those threes. That turns into the 16th best true shooting in the league when you start counting up the free throws. So there's kind of a limit. There's a ceiling to this kind of play style in 2020, I think.
You want to play a game?
What's the game?
I'm Daryl Morey, and you're Kevin Pritchard, the GM of Indiana.
Okay.
Ding, ding.
Hello?
Hey, Kevin, how's it going?
Oh, that's pretty good, just chilling.
I just wanted to tell you, free throws and three-pointers are the most efficient shots in the league.
No, field goal percentage is the only measure of efficiency. Field goals are the most efficient shots in the league.
Yeah, no, that's what I said. Keep doing that.
Yeah, long twos, right?
Yeah,
we'll do
long
twos. Jumpers.
Long twos.
Yeah. No, don't worry, I got that.
All right, dude. See ya.
All right, talk to you later. And the other big part of their identity is, it's weird because Sabonis is a very, very good rebounder. They're not a good rebounding team. They're in the bottom third of the league in defensive rebounding, and they're near the bottom of the league in offensive rebounding. But they have very, very few turnovers. So that's their way of maintaining possessions, maintaining a possession equity with other teams, because they're not really getting extra possessions, but the fact they're so careful with the ball is good for them.
Yeah, and I think even though their 3-point attempt rate is very low, the ones that they do take, they tend to make, which is good. Probably helps them in having the highest field goal percentage in the league.
Their other big advantage that allows them to use the system and be efficient is that they are 6th in the league in terms of assists per game. Right. Because they have Brogdon getting 7 a game, Sabonis getting 5, TJ McConnell getting 5, and Aaron Holiday getting about 3.5. I mean, that's just the top 4. There's a bunch of guys adding, 1 or 2 or 3. But it's like you have guys across both units that can make the right reads along the court, and that makes the mid-range shots that are really not that good. If you have a guy that can see the shot opening up, then I guess that makes it okay.
Yeah, and if you're 6th in assists per game as a team and 5th in fewest turnovers per game as a team, that's a testament to just how heady these players are, right? They're not making mistakes and they're getting each other open. As we're going to see later in the pod, they have a bunch of good off-ball players, which I think helps in converting potential assists to field goals, right? Mm-hmm. So yeah, I mean, it's a solidly constructed team with good players all the way 1 through 8, or even 9, I think.
Yeah, they just have a lot of guys that are above league average and a few guys that are really great. I don't think they have anyone that's like a top 10 player in the league.
No.
I don't know what Oladipo counts as now, but we'll see. It's very much like a many-headed beast, right? They have a bunch of guys that act as cogs in a machine that works really well.
Yeah, for sure.
We went from smallest to biggest in terms of player sizes in the last half of the podcast. Let's start with the bigs in this one. So Sabonis and Turner.
Let's talk about those big guys. Those Bears.
Big boys. So Domantas Sabonis and Myles Turner. Both, I guess, technically centers, but they play side by side in the starting roles in the starting lineup. Right.
And that's just always been the question with them is, it's almost like Derek Favors and Rudy Gobert back in the day with Utah. Both of them are good and they should be starting, but will that pairing fit seamlessly? And I think it has fit pretty well with Sabonis and Turner. And part of the reason for that is that they're just such different players, right? With Sabonis, he profiles as this tough, bruising center that's a very good rebounder. 12.4 rebounds per game, which was 5th in the league.
Insane.
I just didn't even realize he was getting that many boards. I must have missed it during the regular season, And a 19.7 rebound percentage, which was 10th in the league. The issue with him is he doesn't get a lot of blocks, right? He's not a great rim protecting big man. Not that he's terrible on defense.
Yeah, I mean, he's in the 13th percentile among bigs in blocks, and he only gets half a block a game, which you'd think for a guy who's 7 feet tall and hanging out near the rim for most of the time, you'd get at least a few more, But as we'll see later with Myles Turner, they have very complementary play styles in terms of canceling each other's weaknesses out in a way. So it's not the worst thing in the world for the Pacers, but obviously it's something you'd like to see improved.
Right, and one of the ways that I think they don't cancel each other out on offense is that they tend to hang out in different places. 73.6% of Sabonis' shots either come right at the rim or in the floater range, so 0 to 10 feet. And he shoots 51% of his shots right at the rim. That's really strong. As we're going to see with Turner later, he shoots more of his shots from 3. So it's not like they're standing in the same place, taking up space for each other.
What's interesting about Sabonis is he basically never takes threes. He can't shoot them. But if you look at long twos, he makes almost half of them, which is pretty fucking good efficiency for long twos. And he takes them about 14% of the time. So it's not just like a freak occurrence here or there that he got lucky on. This is a very good sample size to base the idea that he's a good mid-range shooter. I just don't understand how you can't convert that into 3-point percentage, but some guys, gets to their head.
Yeah, I mean, it's a testament to Nate McMillan to realize that he's so much better at shooting long twos and allow him to pop out for those shots, right?
Yeah.
Because I think some coaches would say, no, you should just step back a few more feet and shoot that shot because it is the more efficient shot and we're going to force you to do it.
Another affinity that I think McMillan picked up on this year as he slotted Sabonis into a bigger role because I don't think he might have started a handful of games last year. But the other aspect of his game that really, really improved was his playmaking. He's averaging 5 assists per game, which is almost double what he had last year. He had about 2.9, but his turnover percentage has gone down from 16 to about 15. Pretty good decrease. And his assist percentage, which is about 21, is in the 98th percentile for bigs. Not only is he a good passing big man, he's literally one of the best in the league.
Yeah, it's very rare to increase your assists per game that drastically and not also have your turnover percentage increase. Mm-hmm. Because, of course, turnover percentage is going to be higher with more passes thrown because you're taking more risks.
Yeah.
So that's actually really stunning that he was able to increase his productivity as a passer without increasing his turnovers.
Yeah, I mean, he has a really good system. Like, you watch him play, and he really just has a system that works for him, and he's very careful with the ball, and he's very good about making the right calls of who to pass to, right? So he'll take a position in or near the paint, and someone will pass the ball to him, and he'll just stand there, and then he'll see who's more open, and then he'll pass out to either someone on the outside of the arc or someone who cuts in, because they run a lot of cuts when he's in the post, right? But also, he's such a threat at the rim that he can just back up and...
Should I go where every journalist that's ever talked about Sabonis has gone before?
Where's that?
I think he's got a little bit of his dad in him.
Oh yeah, he's got a little bit of his dad in him.
For those that don't know, his father was one of the greatest passing big men of all time.
Yeah, I mean, he's very, very good. And the other thing that he excels at, aside from passing out of the post and or getting to the rim and, dunking the ball, is a very interesting action is setting screens inside to open up mid-range looks or create mismatches in the interior, which you don't see as often these days. But it's very effective for the Pacers. I think a lot of teams don't really expect it because they're not used to playing against a team that plays like this. A little bit antiquated, but hey, it works really well. He's in the 55th percentile as the roll man on pick and rolls, but this doesn't count all of the assists that he gets, which is quite a few. So I'm guessing that number in reality is quite a bit higher.
Yeah, if anyone wants to donate us a Synergy account, we'll get you those numbers.
Oh yeah. You give us a year pass to Synergy and we'll get you a jersey for free.
Yeah, dude, if you get us a Synergy account, we'll get you 2 jerseys.
Yeah.
Maybe not.
We'll see.
Yeah. You found this stat. I thought this was pretty interesting. He's apparently better at defense as a power forward than he is as a center, which I thought was interesting. And thinking about that further, I was wondering if that is more a testament to how good Turner has been on defense. Because you imagine the only lineups that Sabonis is going to be playing power forward in are the ones next to Turner.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, I think the things that make Sabonis at power forward work really well on defense is that he's, I think, a good bit springier.
Yeah.
In terms of just lateral speed. Myles Turner might get the gaudy blocks, but Sabonis is really good at keeping with his guy and can handle some switching, so he doesn't need to be put on the center because he can handle a different assignment pretty decently well. And as we'll get to, Turner's blocking also makes him very good because he can stop guys at the rim. So yeah, they work really well together. It's a very complementary skill set. I feel like Sabonis probably could be a decent defender on centers, but not as good as what they have. They might as well use the guys to their strengths. And the fact that Sabonis can play the center on offense where he's a lot more effective playing out of the post, it does confuse teams a bit, I imagine.
For sure. And I think also just the overall hoops IQ from Sabonis is probably helping him against smaller players.
Definitely. So we'll move on to Turner now, who has a much more, I think, limited role. But he's still a really, really good help defender, and I think his biggest asset to the Pacers is the fact that he spaces the floor so well, because he has a reputation as a very good shooting big.
Yeah, I mean, look, he led the league in blocks in 18-19, and then his block total came down to a pedestrian 2.2 per game.
What is that? Come on, man, you can do better than that. Yeah, I mean, considering the other guy gets 0.5 blocks a game, this is exactly who you want playing next to him. Considering the other guy doesn't shoot from the outside at all, you want a guy who shot 39% from 3 last year. It's down to 34% this year, but I think he's taking a lot more. So it makes sense. You don't want it to be that low, obviously, but I feel like it's just a funk or something. I mean, he still has the threat, And I don't think they're opposed to him taking long mid-rangers as well, which he's okay on too.
Yeah, and those shots are going to open up when they have a more solid and consistent cast of pick-and-roll ball handlers, i.e. Oladipo. You found this stat, though, right? On spot-ups, he's scoring 1.1 points per possession, which is a really strong option, right?
I mean, he's in the 76th percentile, and this is like a quarter of his plays are just being passed the ball as a spot-up shooter. So he's doing his job, and in fact, his true shooting is the exact same as last year. You look at his field goal percentage and everything like that, and it's like, oh, it's gone down, but really true shooting is the only number that matters, and he's just as good. So, I mean, whatever he's doing, it's working for him. Last year, he took only a quarter of his shots from three, and then this year it's almost half. So even if you're making three-pointers at a lower rate, it's okay because you're making up for it with volume and the fact that there's not that many three-pointers going around in terms of what you're using your possessions on if you're the Pacers. So giving the ball to him and hoping he makes it just for the floor spacing and the threat, I think is perfectly good for him. And I think he's done a perfectly good job this year doing it.
Right, and back to the conversation about his fit with Sabonis, not to beat a dead horse and talking about how perfect it is for two guys that don't seem like they'd be perfect for each other, but having a guy that's that good of a spot-up shooter next to a rim-running big man like Sabonis, who also spends some possessions posting up with the ball, passing out of double teams, that sort of thing, a guy like Turner is just perfect for him. You know?
Yeah, because the one thing I will say that's negative about Turner is that he does run a lot of plays as the roll man, about a quarter of them as well.
Yeah.
But he's just not very high percentile in terms of those plays. He's only in the 32nd percentile. And you'd think it's weird because he almost makes 70% of his shots from 0 to 3 feet. But then you watch the film and he's just got a bit of an awkwardness, discomfort in those types of plays. I mean, what you see happen is he'll get past the ball, he'll try to get close to the hoop, but then some guy will offer any amount of resistance. He'll get kind of scared and then he'll pass the ball to someone else, but he doesn't have the vision of someone like Sabonis, so the play just fizzles out and they have to start from square one.
As a roll man, he's almost in between physiques, right? He's not quite big enough to make up for his lack of, I think, smooth finishing, but he's also not quite small enough to be a little bit more in control of his body where he's finishing smoother, right?
Yeah, I mean, he struggles getting around defenders, even if it's a mismatch or something like that. He just has some trouble.
He runs through guys, too,
yeah.
It's just, I don't know.
Either way, I mean, if you're the Pacers, you look at this and you're like, I mean, that's fine, because he doesn't need to do that. And in fact, I'm surprised that he has so many plays as a roll man. I mean, it probably just comes down to his teammates seeing him and being like, he's a big guy, give him the ball, get him to the rim, he's good at that. In reality, he's got a lot of work to do on that end, and we'll see if he ever gets to the point. Probably not with someone like Sabonis.
Yeah, I would doubt it. I just don't see him ever having the feel that Sabonis has.
I do see him being a target for certain teams that want a big man who can space the floor, because they're not in high supply or anything like that. There's a few in the league, and it's a very unique skill set to have. And as the Pacers show, it's a very effective one, and it allows you to have a two-big lineup that really works.
Yeah, I remember last year there were rumors of a potential Jaylen Brown for Myles Turner trade, which was very intriguing to me.
Yeah, that would have been interesting. I wonder who would have won that one.
I mean, this is obviously when Myles Turner's stock was at an all-time high.
Yeah, and Jaylen's was at an all-time low, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think the tables have turned a little bit, but, the thing is, so having those two big guys and basically solid defenders at every position, because they have Justin Holiday is one of the best perimeter defenders in the league.
Unreal.
He's got a defensive box plus minus of 1.6, which is actually better than Myles Turner and Domantas Sabonis, who are each at 1.1, which is they're not slouching numbers,
That's like you're almost making the All-Star team as a defender.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know what exactly the offensive numbers are like, but, they probably cancel each other out a little bit, if I had to guess. And then, you got Malcolm Brogdon, Aaron Holiday, TJ Warren, and Jeremy Lamb. Rest in peace.
Rest in peace.
And they're all totally good on defense. I know Warren had the reputation as being a bad defender, but he's made massive strides. But the identity of this team is definitely very solid defensively. And then you run an offense that works well. it just has some deficiencies.
Yeah, I mean, look, like, the defense was 4th in opponents' points per game and 6th in defensive rating. And those wing players that you just named, on top of the fact that Turner had just, like, a massive year as a paint defender, he was 13th in opponents' field goal percentage at the rim among centers who had at least 10 shots per game shot on them. And 4th in block percentage.
Yeah.
Right? He was a monster in the paint.
Yeah, I mean, he was better than AD at protecting the rim, right?
Yeah.
Just a little bit.
Slightly.
Yeah.
But they're same ballpark, right?
Maybe the Lakers should trade for Myles Turner, right?
AD for Myles Turner.
Yeah.
Who says no?
Yeah, who says no? I don't.
So, yeah, I mean, I think the defense was just unbelievable. And the offense, I think, is really interesting, too. I feel like the story behind the offense is they have so many solid number 2 options, but without Oladipo, they just didn't have a guy to piece everything together.
Yeah, and I mean, you can see that if you just look at the team's stats overall. You don't really have a guy that you can give the ball to that just makes things happen. I think their highest scorer is TJ Warren, who's scoring less than 20 points a game. And, it's a very selfless approach to how to play the game of basketball. I mean, like, Brogdon and Sabonis are often looking for the pass before they're looking for how to score themselves. And that's fine, but at the end of the day, you're going to need someone who can just get you a bucket, especially in the playoffs. Regular season, this will work perfectly fine. I just see things kind of falling apart in the playoffs when you have another team throwing a wrench in the works and you don't know what to do with it. And you don't have a guy that has the talent and strength of will to just, drive to the hoop and get an easy fucking layup or something like that.
For sure. But let's get into some of the guys, these elite second offensive options that we're talking about. And we'll start with the guy that you mentioned, TJ Warren, who had an amazing 3-point shooting year. Shot almost 40% this year after the first 3 years of his career being a net negative on offense as a 3-point shooter. And then last year, he shot 42.8%. So this year was really, in a lot of ways, a justification of the trend of last year.
Right, because he's still shooting about 40% this year.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Right. I was not a believer in his 3-point shooting after last year. I just thought it was going to be an anomaly.
And I mean, some of you guys may say, okay, he only takes 3 threes a game. That's not enough volume. I mean, come on, it's their system. We've seen what we need to. He's got a nasty shot.
Yeah.
And, I mean, it works for him because he can shoot mid-rangers and his coach isn't going to yell at him.
And the guy never passes. So a lot of those 3-pointers are with a hand in his face.
Oh, yeah. I mean, some of the shots that he's been getting off during the bubble have been absurd. I mean, he had a 53-point game a few nights ago. He's actually averaging 40 points a game in the bubble so far, which is insane. We'll see how long he can keep it up. And I think part of what makes his offensive game so strong is how good he is at so many different off-ball plays. So on spot-ups, he's in the 79th percentile. He gets about 1.1 points per possession on 22% of his plays. As in, 22% of the plays that he runs are spot-ups.
Yeah.
On handoffs, he's elite. Which
is a lot.
It's a lot, yeah. On handoffs, he's absolutely elite. He's in almost the 90th percentile and scoring 1.16 points per possession. Cuts, he's in the 86th percentile, scoring almost 1.5 points per possession. And off screens, he's in the 83rd percentile, again, 1.1. And all of these are kind of distributed evenly. I think each is about 9 to 10% of his play type. So it's like you never know what he's going to do, and you never know how they're going to use him because it's a very modular system in a way. And when he does have to do the pick and roll or whatever, and he's not passing out of that pick and roll, he's also pretty good. He's in the 70th percentile, It's like, not bad.
Yeah, we keep saying he's not going to pass. And when we say that, we're referring to the fact that he has one of the worst assist rates in the league. Like, he literally doesn't pass.
It's insane. But, I mean, it's fine when he's making the shots. Who knows what they're going to do when he starts missing a bunch. But McMillan seems like he can talk to the players and get them to do the right thing. So I do have faith. And the best part about him is not only is he so good at all these things, but most of these things are very off-ball type plays. So He's such a good complementary piece for the future. He's not going to ever be ball hogging unless you give him the ball first. And then it's like, go for it, man.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, he's just a guy that's that efficient in so many different ways off ball is going to fit seamlessly on any team, especially when he's got the height and size of TJ Warren. Last thing about Warren is his defense improved drastically from his Phoenix days when he was arguably one of the worst defenders in the league.
Yeah.
So his defensive rating went from 116 in Phoenix to 110, which is really solid. 0.5 defensive win shares to 2.3.
And not a full season yet. And win shares, if you don't know, are cumulative. So they're based on how many minutes you play. So the fact that he already has almost 5 times as many win shares and he hasn't even played really a full season, I mean, that says it all, really.
Also, Phoenix didn't win very many games last year.
Yeah, that's gonna be a hard hit on your win shares there. Not many wins to split among the team.
Yeah, I mean, he just... Every defensive advanced metric, he improved on. So
yeah, and I mean, eye test wise, it's also just night and day. Part of it's effort, part of it's having the personnel around you to tell you what to do, because I don't think Phoenix really had those last year. Clearly they're doing good things this year, but yeah. So now that we've talked about Warren, let's talk a bit more about the engine that had to keep the ship going throughout the season. Malcolm Brogdon, who, like we talked about, went from being a role player to being the lead ball handler. I'd say he did pretty well. I mean, 7 assists a game is basically 10th in the league.
And there was a time where I think he was leading the league, right? I remember early in the season he was averaging 9.
Yeah, before LeBron had his crazy explosion. You want to talk a bit about his play types?
Yeah, so he runs about 8 pick and rolls per game and 2.6 ISOs per game, which is up drastically from Milwaukee, where he did a lot more spot-up shooting. That's a 67th percentile for pick and rolls and 72nd percentile for ISOs. But like we were talking about with Demo, and we've said a few times on the pod, those numbers are deflated by the fact that they don't include assists, right?
Yeah. I'm actually very surprised by how good he is at ISOs. And you do see him use them a lot more than you'd expect.
Yeah.
And he's very good at them. I mean,
I was shocked at how low the number was on NBA.com.
Well, I mean, the fact that he's getting 1 point per possession on ISOs, and that's not including assists, like we said earlier, that's the same as Jimmy Butler in Philadelphia numbers, which you do not expect from Malcolm Brogdon. And it's very impressive that he's been able to kind of fit into that role and, you know, just go one-on-one with these guys and get to the basket.
And a lot of that's the drives per game, right?
Yeah. Yeah, because he runs over 14 drives a game, which is in the top 20 in the league. And his 12.5 assist percentage on drives is the highest among everyone in the top 20. For comparison, Luka Doncic has a 12.3% assist percentage on drives, and he only gets 0.7 more assists. So he gets 2.5 assists per game off of drives versus 1.8 for Brogdon, but he takes 6 more drives a game than Brogdon. So Brogdon's doing very efficient things. The flip side of that, right, is he's very good at finding assists out of drives. He's the second lowest scoring on drives in the top 20. Only Fred VanVleet had worse numbers. So he scores about 47% of the time, and he scores about 6.7 points a game off of drives, which on 14 drives a game, you'd want that to be a little bit higher, because at a certain point, if opposing defenses stop being intimidated by your drives because they kind of know what your game plan is, they're like, okay, well, you know, he's okay, but we don't have to worry too much. They're not going to warp their defenses around it as much, and it's going to be a lot harder to get those assists that he's getting.
Yeah, and they're going to be closing the lanes where passes should be going through. It's funny, I think the eye test confirms both of those stats. Like, for the finishing, it's very obvious that he's not a natural finisher in the way some other guys like Trae Young or Kyrie Irving are. He seems to take more of a Russell Westbrook approach of kind of like stampeding towards the rim. But you also see those kick-out passes that he does, and he's very good at those. You know, he's hitting guys in their shooting pocket. He's hitting all of these amazing off-ball players.
I think the strength on assists does, at the moment, balance out and I won't say weakness, because the 47 points percentage isn't that much worse than the rest of the league. What his weakness was this year really was his efficiency.
Yeah. Which
dipped significantly, 6% on field goals and over 10% on three-pointers, which he had the reputation of being an amazing three-point shooter. and now he's shooting 31% on three-pointers. So, what happened? We talked about this a little bit earlier. When you have Giannis on your team, you're just going to be getting amazing shots because all eyes are going to be on Giannis, and you're going to benefit from that because you're going to get a sneaky pass, and you're going to hit that three because that's what you're good at.
And the three is going to be open.
Yeah, exactly. Problem is, you have a guy like Sabonis who's your secondary playmaker when Oladipo's obviously out. And out of the post, Sabonis can't really effectively set up Brogdon on the outside. First of all, he doesn't have the same gravity of someone like Giannis. And he's usually looking for the guys that are a little bit closer to him in the corners. So, Brogdon, once he passes the ball to Sabonis, it's likely that Brogdon's not going to be getting the ball back. And I think that means that when Brogdon is shooting threes, it's often, either he has to create his own shot, do some fancy footwork, and launch it off, or he plays with someone like Aaron Holiday or TJ McConnell, who are actually really good at setting him up for threes because they provide a bit of a threat, a bit of spacing, and they're both pretty decent with their playmaking vision, especially TJ McConnell.
Yeah, I thought that his efficiency was going to drop going from the Bucks to the Pacers. I was not prepared for it to drop as much as it did.
Yeah.
8 points lower in terms of field goal percentage and 12 points lower, almost 13 points lower in terms of 3-point percentage. I think there's going to be a little bit of a reversion back to the mean, especially with Oladipo coming back and there being a little bit more spacing for him. You'd agree he's a little overextended in the amount of ball handling that he has to do for the Pacers.
Yeah. And also what I think is an interesting dynamic, is how he fits in with some of the other pieces, and this contributes to kind of a lack of efficiency. One thing is that when he's playing with Sabonis, the team just takes a lot fewer three-pointers. This actually changes when he's playing with Holiday or McConnell, Aaron Holiday or TJ McConnell.
Yeah, I guess you have to specify the Holiday.
Yeah. One of the craziest stats that I've seen, and obviously part of this is small sample size, but when Brogdon's playing with TJ McConnell over the 110 minutes that they've played together, the 3-point percentage increases by 27%. That's not a typo.
Oh my god.
At least I don't think it is. If it is, then Basketball Reference...
It's funny too because McConnell's not an incredible 3-point shooter.
No, but McConnell will just take over a drive and pass out to Brogdon. Who knows? McConnell's also a very good driver. So, he's quick on his feet. He gets past defenders really easily. He's really sneaky. So I think he does take a bit of gravity and help set up Brogdon. But I feel like there must be something else going on. Maybe they just have a crazy 3-point shooting lineup during those minutes.
It's hard to say.
Yeah.
It's hard to say.
But talking a bit more about McConnell and just the bench in general. So McConnell, those 5 assists a game that we talked about earlier, come on 19 minutes a game.
It's nuts.
Yeah, that's almost 10 assists per 36. And he only has 2.6 turnovers per 36. You do the math, that's almost a 4 assist to turnover ratio.
Which is nuts. That's
Insane.
like prime Chris Paul level of playmaking.
Limited minutes, so grain of salt, but that's still very, very good numbers. And that's a guy that you're never going to shake your head before you put him on the court,
For sure. I was kind of surprised that Philly let him go, because I just thought without Markelle Fultz on the roster anymore, that they didn't really have a great option for backup point guard, and that he had been there for so long and was kind of important to their team.
Well, he made him pay in that game against the this Pacers versus Sixers game. It's not pretty.
Yeah, dude. Remember when he dunked on Embiid? No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah. He fucking posterized Embiid.
Yeah, and then, they also play Aaron Holiday at point guard. I think he looks really strong. He's shooting 39.4% on threes and 45% on drives. That's really good, especially for a guy as small and quick as he is.
Yeah, and he's driving a lot too, It's over 7 drives a game, and he's only playing 24 minutes, and he's usually not the primary guy. So the fact that he's getting those in is quite a good sign. Still a net negative in terms of box plus minus, minus 1.6. You're getting close to that -2 replacement level. Surprisingly, though, the minus 0.4 defensive box plus minus for a guy that's 6 feet tall and small, that's pretty decent.
Yeah, and young.
Yeah.
Younger guards usually takes them a few years to get competent at defense.
Yeah. This is where it gets even more mysterious, how this team can be the least 3-point shooting team in the league. Justin Holiday and Doug McDermott are both shooting in the mid-40s from 3-point range. Justin Holiday is at 44%. Doug McDermott, okay, maybe I I spoke a little too soon. 42%. Still pretty good, let's be honest.
Solid.
Yeah. McDermott, I mean, that's what he does. But Justin Holiday is just having a career year from three, and it's unlocked a lot of actions for them.
It's quite frankly shocking to have two players this good at three-point shooting coming off your bench, you know? It's a testament to how well constructed the team was.
Absolutely. You know, maybe part of the fact that the three-point percentages are so high does reflect that the three-point shot is maybe just an opportunistic thing.
I imagine if we could find what percentage of their threes were wide open without a defender within 10 feet, they would have been pretty high in that category too. And the eye test confirms that. You know, they only take really wide open threes unless you're TJ Warren and you take whatever shot you get your hands on.
Yeah, and TJ Warren, they give him the green light to shoot from anywhere on the court. I mean, they have faith. But I mean, I think the end of the day, if you broke up the Pacers and sent their players to all the other teams in the league, you'd have such a competitive league. They have so many guys that would be awesome starters on championship teams. Like,
yeah.
The piece that you need. But they're all on the Pacers, and then they don't have the star because they're a small market team. I mean, life isn't fair, right? The big question mark is Oladipo, because he was that guy for them, and he did a very good job. And he was a great playmaker, you know, running the pick and roll. Was one of the best pick and roll guys in 17-18 in the 81st percentile. In 18-19, NBA.com lists his percentile as 57th. But I would say since he had more assists that year, it's probably not counting those.
Yeah.
NBA.com, fix your shit, please. But yeah, I mean, he was growing as a distributor. I think the shooters are going to benefit even more when he gets back into full swing. He's been playing a lot of off-ball, passive, secondary minutes, which is fine because he's coming off an injury and he just kind of decided spur of the moment to come to the bubble. But ideally, for next year, you're going to hope that he's going to come back guns blazing.
And there have been moments in some of the games that they've played, especially the Philly game, where Oladipo looked really good. In the first couple minutes, he had a quick turnover and an offensive foul. But after that, especially in like the second and third quarters, he started hitting long three-pointers. Mm-hmm. He was driving at the rim. Like, he started looking more and more like himself. Yeah. So, I don't know. If he can get to that point within the 8 qualifying games, the playoffs might be interesting for them.
Definitely. I wouldn't put them as a favorite in any series that they're in. But since Oladipo's an X factor and he's kind of been hiding his true strength until this point, if he decides to just go balls out, you know, like, anything could happen, really. So let's just talk a little bit about what we've noticed in the bubble. They don't have Domantas Sabonis due to plantar fasciitis. Apparently, this is one of those injuries where it's like, we don't know how long he's going to be out. He might come back for the playoffs. Thing is, if they don't make it past the first round, it's a moot point. The other guy, I lied. We're talking about him a third time in this episode. Jeremy Lamb, ACL tear.
Jeremy Lamb, a.k.a. Sacrificial Lamb.
Yep, not going to be participating in the games, but he is in the bubble. And you have Brogdon, Myles Turner, Jakar Sampson, and Goga Bitadze with little soft tissue injuries that...
They're banged up.
They're banged up.
One thing that I thought was really funny is, you know, in the Sixers game, they had to play Jakar Sampson at backup center. We mentioned it earlier in the Sixers pod. Right. It's funny that this team, who in the offseason people were saying is so big, they're so loaded at center, is now down to like 1.5 centers, you know?
Yeah. No, the Sabonis thing has really changed a lot for them. When they played against Orlando, they actually had a 3-guard lineup. So It was Malcolm Brogdon, Victor Oladipo, Aaron Holiday, TJ Warren, and Myles Turner. Apparently the team's 20th unique starting lineup of the season. It was really a small lineup for them. Like you said, I mean, they went from having so many centers in the rotation. Now they basically have Myles Turner and a couple guys that you really don't want to play if you don't have to. But it was like a 5-out, very 3-point reliant style.
I like that lineup.
Yeah, it worked really well. They were destroying Orlando. I mean, it felt bad to watch it. So they were basically just doing quick cuts and drives along the baseline at first, frustrating Orlando. And then they just said, whatever, we're going to stop even running plays. We're just going to have like TJ McConnell drive because Markelle Fultz is super slow and Vucevic is positioned next to Myles Turner, who's out on the arc. So the paint is open. There's no one defending it. The guard defense on Orlando is not really that great. So TJ McConnell just runs and hits the exact same layup 3 or 4 times in quick succession. You see them start getting frustrated. So they're like, okay. Steve Clifford's like, all right, Vucci, switch on to TJ McConnell when he drives and block his shot and make him feel really bad. And he's like, got it, boss. So they start doing that. But then he's switched on to TJ McConnell, right? And then TJ McConnell, like, comes in a little bit, gets close to the paint, and then just passes out to Myles Turner, who's being guarded by Markelle Fultz. And then he just hits a three.
I mean, that's the thing about having these really small, switchable lineups, which, hilariously enough, they've just been forced into playing. But it's really working out for them because it leads to so many different weird matchups. Like, Myles Turner being guarded by Fultz, that's not something that you're necessarily going to get unless you have one of these small, spreadable matchups.
I do wonder if it's going to be a situational thing for them in the future to choose whether to go with the big Sabonis and Myles Turner lineup, or if they're going to keep using this 3-guard lineup that's, I mean, you're seeing it's a spread offense. You never see this from the Pacers, but they know how to do it. I think they just like to do something else because it plays to their best guys' strengths.
Yeah, for sure. All right, should we wrap this up?
Yeah, I think we've said a lot. We're getting into the serious teams of the East now. Very interesting. Very similar results in terms of offensive and defensive rating, but the paths they took there are so different.
It's almost like you want the Pacers to package a bunch of their role players for Tobias Harris. You know what I mean? Like,
oh, yeah.
A trade between these teams would, I think, work out really well for each of them, you know?
I mean, the Pacers could trade with almost any team. They have some of the best role players in a bunch of different positions. Whether that is relying on a couple career years from the right guys, who knows? But hey, it's fun to watch and it's different, you know? There's so many teams that run the same offense in the NBA. To be honest, I didn't watch all that much Pacers during the season, but I've enjoyed going back and looking through their film and seeing their system.
All right, well, we'll be back next week for
Thunder and Rockets.
Nice.
Yeah, it's going to be a fun one.
It's going to be awesome. A lot of good bubble talk with those teams.
Oh, yeah. A lot of dramatic storylines.
All right, and don't forget to send us the answer to our question. You will have to listen to the pod to figure out that question.
Don't forget to subscribe and tell all your friends to subscribe as well so you can get that jersey.
All right, away team out.